Have you ever stepped into a space and instantly sensed that everyone present was about to witness something extraordinary, as if the atmosphere itself transformed in an instant, and suddenly the housekeeper was poised to heal a billionaire before 24 specialists who couldn't even identify his condition? That's precisely what unfolded on that Thursday morning in the Willis Tower penthouse, 42 stories above ground, overlooking Chicago with a vista so striking it seemed almost dangerous to approach. Harrison Caldwell, the sort of man whose handshake sealed multimillion-dollar transactions, was deteriorating slowly and steadily. And no one, not the Mayo Clinic, not Stanford, not even the renowned specialists in Munich, had the slightest idea what was wrong. Yet it was Kate, standing there in her scrubs with perspiration still fresh on her forehead, who declared, "I can heal him in 2 minutes." Several people laughed nervously. A few reached for their phones to contact security, but I can assure you, no one was laughing 5 minutes later. Let me rewind for a moment. This entire situation began with a man who possessed the wealth to purchase half the city, Caldwell. His silver hair was always impeccably styled. His eyes were so piercingly blue they could stop you in your tracks. He embodied every aspect of royalty within his own domain. On this specific December morning, however, the only things he could control were the trembling in his hand and the dread coiling in his stomach. He'd consulted with specialists, 19 of them to be exact, each one decorated with prestigious credentials, and not a single one had offered more than an elaborate expression of uncertainty. Each day he grew slightly weaker, slightly paler, and you could read in his expression that he understood the reality before any physician verbalized it. Sometimes a person knows they're dying well before it appears in any medical record. Meanwhile, Kate, quiet, observant, her hair pulled back and her gaze as keen as a predator's, had been maintaining that penthouse for 3 years. Do you understand how invisible you become when you're cleaning someone else's floors? To Caldwell, she'd become as unnoticeable as the furniture. But the advantage of invisibility is that you observe everything. The meals left untouched, the way his knuckles turned white as he gripped the counter's edge, the medications accumulating in the bathroom cabinet like grave markers, and the scent. It sounds strange, doesn't it? But Kate's grandmother had been a traditional healer. And there exists a particular kind of sorrow that attaches itself to people like a dark companion. Kate could detect it from across a room. She was the first to recognize that Caldwell's condition wasn't merely declining, it was disintegrating from within. And all those physicians kept conducting tests, collecting samples, debating about immunological factors while overlooking what was obvious right before them. The man was perishing from heartbreak. Have you ever heard a body communicate what a physician cannot? That's what her grandmother used to teach her. Doctors arrive with their equipment, but healers come with compassion. Kate had observed Caldwell's daily patterns deteriorate, coffee left cold and untouched, endless hours at his desk fixated on an aged photograph of a young girl. Annie, that was the name inscribed in fading ink on the back. Kate had never inquired about it, but you could see how Caldwell drove himself to exhaustion, the kind of compulsion that stems from fleeing something irreparable. So when Caldwell ultimately collapsed, it wasn't Kate's first time witnessing someone destroyed by grief so thick you could sense it in the atmosphere. The boardroom had fallen into absolute silence, every influential executive paralyzed as he struck the ground. The emergency responders didn't notice Kate positioned against the window, observing every action, feeling the space rotate with terror, but she recognized what they couldn't, the bluish discoloration around his mouth, the way his body went limp, and above all, that distinctive smell. Not mortality precisely, but spiritual affliction. And then came the transfer to the hospital, Northwestern Memorial's VIP section, all sterile sounds and premium healthcare. Dr. Phillips, the longtime friend and cancer specialist, recited symptoms and nodded solemnly as Caldwell faded in and out of consciousness, crying out for Annie in his delirious state. Remorse, bereavement, the burden of 5 years attempting to purchase absolution through hospital donations and experimental treatments. Nothing was proving effective. Back in her modest apartment, Kate attempted to release the concern, but it adhered to her as heavily as the Chicago snowfall. She retrieved her grandmother's small bottle of lavender essence, a substance intended to soothe distressed souls, not cure terminal illness. She slipped back into Caldwell's hospital room, moving soundlessly as a spirit, and placed just a single drop on his pillowcase. "You're not succumbing to any medical condition, Mr. Caldwell," she murmured, her voice wavering. "You're dying from a shattered heart. You understand what I'm saying. Now, It would be wonderful if everything transformed right then and there. But, as you know, existence doesn't operate fairly. Caldwell awakened, noticed Kate, and for the first time in years, he allowed his defenses to crumble, asking her, begging her, not to abandon him. She shared the truth about mourning, about Annie, about how no physician could rescue him unless he began confronting what wounded him. And the following morning, after departing that hospital against every specialist's recommendation, he immediately returned to his pattern of avoidance. Consultants in Munich, experimental protocols at Stanford, additional millions discarded fruitlessly. He refused to accept that the solution might be as uncomplicated as forgiveness. But sometimes circumstances won't permit escape. A winter blizzard canceled every flight to Europe. Caldwell returned to his penthouse, attempted and failed to prepare a pot of soup, the same soup he used to create with Annie on leisurely Sunday afternoons, accompanied by triangular grilled cheese sandwiches and everything. When Kate discovered him seated on the kitchen tiles, surrounded by scorched cookware and demolished hopes, he finally spoke her name aloud, Annie. And for the first time, he permitted himself to remember, permitted himself to grieve properly. That evening, Kate remained with him. She observed him fall apart completely, provided comfort through a night of fever and tremors. And by morning, something fundamental had transformed. Caldwell canceled his Munich appointment, retrieved Annie's medical documentation, everything he'd kept concealed like a shameful secret. Every fragment of agony and optimism he'd carried for 5 years. They examined the records together, and Kate posed the question that genuinely mattered. When did you last pay respects at her grave? Caldwell had no response. He'd never gone, too frightened that visiting would make her death undeniable. So they traveled there, two wounded souls facing the snowstorm, walking to a peaceful location beneath an ancient oak tree. Yellow flowers, Annie's preferred variety, vivid against the grayness. Caldwell collapsed to his knees, weeping uncontrollably, finally expressing the words he should have spoken years earlier. And as he read aloud from her beloved book, tranquility, something resembling tranquility at least, descended upon him. Recovery isn't a direct path, but it must begin somewhere. And that morning, it began in the snow. Do you imagine a story concludes there? Not even close. Love and healing are never that straightforward. Caldwell employed a private detective, investigated Kate's history, and uncovered the errors she'd committed, violated professional boundaries, terminated from positions, compromised ethical lines while assisting other families. He confronted her directly, accusing her of manipulation, of exploiting him like a target. The confidence they'd established disintegrated, and Kate, maintaining her dignity, departed, warning him he would become ill again. Not through supernatural means, but from selecting fear instead of love. And predictably, Caldwell's symptoms returned with devastating force. Back to the medical facility, his body failing more severely than before. No medication could address the suffering of losing someone he'd finally allowed into his life. Dr. Phillips recognized it for what it truly was, contacted Kate, pleaded with her to explain what she'd accomplished. She revealed the truth. I helped him cease running from his grief. I helped him realize that love doesn't have to consume you destructively. But she was finished pursuing anyone who wouldn't place faith in her. Christmas Eve arrived, and Caldwell, defying medical directives, discharged himself from a hospital, dressed warmly, and traveled to Annie's grave. He conversed with his daughter about Kate, about his failures, about what authentic love represented. The next morning, he appeared at Kate's doorstep, hospital identification band still attached to his wrist, bouquet of yellow daffodils clutched in his hand, background investigation report torn into pieces. He implored her to stay, to trust him, to choose optimism over fear. He confessed he loved her, not for her healing abilities, not for her insight, but for diving into the depths with him when he was sinking. He presented her with a yellow diamond ring, Annie's favorite color. Kate accepted, but established one condition. They would visit Annie's grave weekly and continue reading to her. That's the proper way to honor the departed. You continue loving, you continue existing. 1 year afterward, the Caldwell Bennett Foundation inaugurated its facility, merging his financial resources with her knowledge, healing children globally, sometimes through medicine, sometimes through something more ancient and tender. And every Sunday they read to Annie beneath the oak tree, their laughter and narratives mingling with the breeze. So, what's your opinion? Did Caldwell ultimately choose existence over remorse? Was Kate correct about love being the most powerful remedy? Share your perspectives below. Hit subscribe and let's discuss what genuine healing looks like. Because sometimes the only treatment is a heart courageous enough to attempt once more.